Hi guys, welcome to Multiverse. With the upcoming Earth 3 DLC that's coming up that will feature the evil Crime Syndicate of America, I thought we could take a look at the JLA Earth 2 graphic novel that was published about 15 years ago by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. It even was mentioned during the live stream. Basically, this comic book, this graphic novel, is what the storyline around Earth 3 was based on. It's a bit convoluted though because originally the Crime Syndicate of America came from Earth 3. Before the Crisis on Infinite Earth, Earth 3 was the home of the Crime Syndicate of America. But then the Crisis on Infinite Earth happened, Earth 3 was destroyed, the Crime Syndicate of America was destroyed, and later down the line, a new version of the Crime Syndicate of America was introduced, and a new version of Earth 2 was introduced, and in that timeline or that storyline, the Crime Syndicate of America was actually coming from Earth 2 as opposed to coming from Earth 3 as it used to be. And then at some point, the New 52 happened, and somehow a new version of the Crime Syndicate of America was created, and once more, the Crime Syndicate of America was coming from Earth 3. So again, it's a bit convoluted because it was changed through the years. And it flip-flopped pretty much between Earth 2 and Earth 3. But nowadays, Earth 3 is where the Crime Syndicate of America comes from. And that is where the DCUO version of the Crime Syndicate comes from. Even though they are inspired by the story where the Crime Syndicate of America actually came from Earth 2. So again, it's a bit convoluted, but hopefully you'll get the hang of it after a while. So I thought it would be appropriate to discuss the JLA Earth 2 comic, where basically the storyline that DC Universe Online will use comes from. There's going to be plenty of spoilers, so spoiler warning. Essentially, if you don't want to get any spoilers, I would strongly suggest go get yourself a copy of that comic. I'm sure you can get a trade paperback very easily. And go read that comic. It's an awesome comic. If you haven't read it just yet, go and read it. It's going to be worth it. Just be careful not to get the New 52 Earth 2 comic by accident. I could easily see someone make the mistake, go to their comic shop, look for the Earth 2 graphic novel or trade paperback, and end up purchasing the wrong version of the Earth 2 comic. So again, make sure that you get the JLA Earth 2 that features the Crime Syndicate of America, and all should be good. Again, one last time, spoiler warning, there will be plenty of spoilers. So there will be plenty of spoilers for the comic, but also, from what we understand, the Earth 3 DLC storyline is pretty much inspired by that comic. So if you don't want to get spoiled at all, then wait until you can actually play the Earth 3 DLC before watching this video. But if you don't mind any spoilers at all, then let's go. So again, as I mentioned, originally speaking, the Crime Syndicate of America came from Earth 3. It was an evil version of the Justice League that lived on an alternate world, which was labeled Earth 3. Earth 1 was the Earth with the regular heroes. Earth 2 was the Earth with the Justice Society of America. Basically, the Golden Age heroes in World War II with Jay Garrick as the Flash, Alan Scott as Green Lantern, and all that good stuff. And Earth 3 was the evil version of the Justice League called the Crime Syndicate of America, featuring Ultraman as the evil version of Superman, All-Man as the evil version of Batman, and Superwoman as the evil version of Wonder Woman. There was also a whole bunch of other versions of evil Justice League characters, but we're not going to name them all to try to keep it quick. So again, during the Crisis on Infinite Earth, Earth 3 was destroyed. There was this antimatter wave that came in, destroyed Earth 3, destroyed the Crime Syndicate of America. Pretty much the only survivor from Earth 3 was Alexander Luthor. Basically, his father, Lex Luthor, and I forget who the mother was. They took Alexander, they put him in a spaceship, and they, instead of just sending him into space, they sent him across time and across the multiverse. And somehow, Alexander Luthor ended up in the Earth 1 universe. If I remember correctly, it was sent to the satellite that the Justice League had at the time. At some point in time, the Justice League had a satellite that was floating in space, as opposed to having a base on the moon or even a base in Metropolis. And in the Justice League satellite at the time, the Justice League wasn't based there. So the satellite was empty. So when Alexander Luthor ended up on the Justice League satellite, there was no one to greet him, no one to save him. But he was found a bit later on by the Monitor. And basically the Monitor kept him safe until he grew up into manhood, which was pretty quick. Somehow his aging was accelerated. And then Alexander Luthor was a pretty crucial part during the Crisis on Infinite Earth to pretty much save what was left of the multiverse and pretty much help to combine the 5 remaining Earths into a single Earth. But sadly, towards the end of Crisis on Infinite Earth, our friend Alexander Luthor, alongside the original Superman, Superboy Prime, and also the original Lois Lane, they all ended up into some sort of a pocket universe where they stayed until Final Crisis. Sadly, during the pages of Final Crisis, our friend Alexander Luthor and also Superboy Prime were both revealed to be some evil villains, and they started doing villainous things, sadly. We also saw Alexander Luthor later in the pages of Forever Evil, again in a storyline involving the Crime Syndicate of America, but I will not mention that storyline too much here because talking about the Crime Syndicate of America is convoluted enough as it is. I will try to keep each version separate. So in the future I will make, let's say, a video about the version we saw in Forever Evil, basically the New 52 version, and I will make also a video about the version we saw in Crisis on Two Earths. Basically, there was an animated film that was made featuring the Crime Syndicate of America fighting against the Justice League. So let's back into our Earth 2 comic. Basically, the comic starts with the Justice League saving an airliner that is in distress, only to realize that everyone aboard the airliner is already dead. And once they start examining the people, they realize that there is some weird anomaly with those people. Basically, things like the heart being on the wrong side of the body, and also when they examine the plane doesn't seem to exist in their world. It's from an airline company that doesn't exist. So at first they're a bit perplexed. But then later on, they meet our friend Alexander Luthor, whom at first they think is Lex Luthor. But once Alexander explains the whole thing, he manages to convince them that he's not the Luthor that they know, that he comes from another world. And in this version of the storyline, the other world, the Earth 2, is actually in the antimatter universe. Basically, you have to remember that at that time, the multiverse no longer existed. You only had one Earth. So in order to be able to get an alternate Earth where the Crime Syndicate could be located, what Morrison ended up doing is that he pretty much created an Earth 2 in the negative universe, in the antimatter universe. So you still had at the time the regular universe, and you still had the antimatter universe. And in order to be able to get an Earth 2 without having a multiverse, what they ended up doing was that they ended up creating an Earth 2 within the antimatter universe. So this Earth 2 was in the antimatter universe. And that's where our friends, the Crime Syndicate of America, actually came from. So the Justice League decides to help out our friend, their new friend, Alexander Luthor, and they decide to go back to Earth 2 with him. And there's a whole bunch of shenanigan that happens on Earth 2. The Crime Syndicate does have this huge satellite, which they use to oversee literally everyone on the planet. But also behind the scene, there is a Superwoman who has some sort of weird affair with Owlman, quote-unquote, behind Ultraman's back. Because strangely enough, they seems to have an affair behind his back, but he seems quite aware of it because he seems to be able to observe them from the satellite from time to time. So it's a weird interaction between the three. Like technically Ultraman and Superwoman seems to be together, but Superwoman seems to be having an affair with Owlman, and somehow Ultraman seems to be aware of the whole thing. So it's a weird relationship that the three have. And Ultraman does threaten Owlman a bit, but he doesn't really seem to be doing anything about it, despite being aware of the situation. There's a few characters like the Martian Manhunter or Aquaman who did not seem to have a counterpart on Earth 2. Although Manhunter does have a counterpart in the animated movie, but and it's an awesome counterpart. But I will wait until I make the video about the animated movie before mentioning it any further. So basically, there's only about half of the Justice League that goes with Alexander Luthor to try to save his world, quote unquote, and the other half of the Justice League remains on Earth to oversee things while the rest of the Justice League is gone. And when they go into Earth 2, they realize a whole bunch of things that are a bit different from what they're used to. But the biggest difference that they finally notice or that they learn of after a while is that on Earth 2, evil wins. It would seem that the laws of reality or of the laws of physics are totally the opposite from Earth 1. And on that Earth, evil will triumph all the time. There will be good that will be fighting back and trying to oppose the forces of evil, but somehow it's as if that in that universe the rules are rigged so that evils will win all the time. And vice versa. On Earth 1, it seems to be said that good will actually win. But the whole confrontation between the Crime Syndicate and the Justice League is little more than a smokescreen. Actually, behind the scene, there's the evil Brainiac who's actually manipulating events in order to get his goal. So basically, Brainiac is manipulating everyone in order to have the Earth 2 and Earth 1 Earth collide together and pretty much destroying everyone. And sadly, Superman being Superman cannot really stop Brainiac because in this reality, Brainiac is an organic creature. He's a living being as opposed to just being a computer. And Superman is not powerless, but he can't really stop him. So what he ends up doing is that he ends up going back to his Earth. And in the end, it's Ultraman who ends up stopping Brainiac and ends up pretty much lobotomizing the poor Brainiac. So the storyline for Earth 3 was quite fun, and there was a few twists and turns here and there. And it was nice to be able to see the Crime Syndicate once more. And some of the redesigns by Frank Whiteley was quite nice, and the artwork overall by Whiteley was pretty good. As a rule of thumb, Frank Whiteley usually does a good job visually speaking, and some of his redesigns weren't not that different from some of the original designs for the Crime Syndicate, but some of the tweaks he added, like basically pretty much changed Ultraman just slightly by changing the emblem. And that alone made a pretty big change for the character. The emblem he came up was really, really nice. Sadly, that pretty much was changed in the more recent New 52 designs, but now what can you do? And his design for Owlman was actually pretty clever and pretty nice to look at. Again, strangely enough, that's not really the design we're going to see in the Earth 3 DLC, although they did add the helmet that the Earth 2 character has as an OP headpiece for the Earth 3 DLC. So in the Earth 3 DLC, you will get an Owlman set of gear that doesn't really look like that, but there is a headpiece that looks exactly like the headpiece that our friend Owlman is using here. So using the OP headpiece and various pieces of gear that's already in the game, or various headpiece from the new Owlman set of gear that will be added to the game, you should be able to recreate something that kind of looks like the Earth 2 Owlman. So again, visually speaking, Frank Whiteley did a really good job on this series. The look he gave to the characters was perfect, and also the mood and the atmosphere that he gave to the story really fitted really well with the mood and the story that Grant Morrison came up with. And again, there was a few twists here and there that were really fun to look at. Like basically, it was fun to see that Thomas Wayne is the one who actually is the commissioner in this reality. And somehow Bruce Wayne, sadly, is dead in that reality. Owlman in that version is not an evil version of Bruce Wayne. He's actually an evil version of Bruce Wayne's brother, which is Thomas Wayne Jr. And as I mentioned, you also see Superwoman having some sort of affair with Owlman. but she seems also to be fooling around a bit with an alternate version of Jimmy Olsen. So overall, it was a great comic. It had some great artwork, and it had a great story with twists and turns, plenty of mysteries, and a satisfying conclusion. Essentially, it is just one story. It doesn't end on a cliffhanger. It doesn't end to be continued or anything like that. It is literally a one-shot story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I can see why DCUO decided to use this storyline as opposed to a storyline that we'll see later in Forever Evil that will again feature the Crime Syndicate of America. Although that version in Forever Evil will be the new 52 version of the Crime Syndicate. But here we have a story that has, again, a beginning, a middle, and end. It doesn't end up in a cliffhanger. It doesn't end up to be continued, as opposed to the Forever storyline, which was a bit of a mess, and that ended up pretty much just being the setup for the next storyline that would follow. But again, I will make a different video to discuss the Forever Evil storyline, and also we'll make a different video to discuss the animated movie. Because already, as you saw, just with this one storyline and this one version of the characters, it was already a bit convoluted by itself. If we start talking about all the different versions of the Crime Syndicate of America within one video, it's gonna get very convoluted really fast and very hard to follow. So again, the storyline here was really good. If you never read it, I strongly suggest you give it a try. Even if you watch the whole video, reading the storyline, much different than me talking about it, and also visually speaking, it is worth to look at. The artwork by Frank Whiteley, once more, was really good. So for the artwork alone, it would be worth it. But the story is pretty good as well, and the mixing of the artwork and the storyline goes really well together. So again, I would strongly suggest, if you never read that comic, go ahead and read it. It is worth every penny. And again, it shouldn't be that difficult to find a trade paperback of that storyline in your nearest comic store, or even better, order it from Amazon. So I hope that got you excited about the upcoming Earth 3 storyline, which will be very much inspired by the storyline in this comic. And even some of the styles, like the Owlman headpiece, actually come straight from that comic. Like the Owlman OP piece of gear is exactly the Owlman headpiece that you see right here, right now. So that's pretty much it for now, guys. So as always, thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.